All right, hello and a warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for our pre-arrival webinar that will focus on travel and immigration updates. My name is Grace Fuller. I serve as the Manager of International Student Experience and Engagement at the International Students and Programs Office, often referred to as ISPO, and I'll hand it over to my colleague to introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Grace. My name is Gabi Hoffman, and I work alongside Grace at ISPO. I'm the Assistant Director for Student Experience and Engagement.
Wonderful. So if this is your first webinar, a few housekeeping items before we begin. So you are in listen only mode, which means you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. So the way that we'll communicate today is by submitting questions through the Q&A feature on your Zoom bar. I see a few of you have actually already started raising your hand. And so just a friendly reminder that that will be the primary way that you can communicate with us. We encourage you to submit questions throughout this webinar. We have dedicated a portion at the end where we'll dedicate to open question and answer, but feel free if you have any follow-up questions to any of these slides or any of the points we make, you can submit your questions throughout the webinar. And finally, we are recording. So you'll be able to view this webinar recording as well as other webinar recordings that we've done at iwebinars.ucsd.edu. You'll click on webinars for newly admitted students and then pre-arrival webinars. And that's how you'll be able to access all of these webinar recordings. So again, just a friendly reminder, this is what the Q&A feature will look like on your Zoom menu bar. Again, you can submit your questions at any time throughout today's session, but we have dedicated a time at the end to really focus on open question and answer. And then a little bit about our agenda today. So we'll start off by doing some first steps checklist and reminders. Then I'll hand it over to my colleague Gabi to discuss UC San Diego's Return to Learn plan for fall 2021. Talk about some of the current visa and travel information and how might that impact you as an international student at UC San Diego. We'll also be discussing enrollment and course availability, as well as vaccine information. So we tried to really focus on many of the common questions that our office has been getting from our international student community. But again, feel free to submit any follow-up questions. All right, so first off, I'd like to refer you to our website specifically designed for newly admitted international students. Here you can find important information about requesting your immigration documents, such as your Form I-20 or DS-2019, and preparing for arrival. It is very likely that if you have questions about how to request these immigration documents, you'll be able to find those answers here on our website at inewstudent.ucsd.edu. Additionally, we also have a new feature on our website where you can ask Triton. So this is a chat bot, typically in the right bottom hand corner of the screen. And so if you don't know where to start, we encourage you to type in maybe some keywords, and that Ask Triton chatbot will point you in the right direction. So we hope that you will give it a try. And with that, I'll hand it over to Gabi to discuss Return to Learn Fall 2021.
Great. Thank you so much, Grace. So if you just go to the next slide, we are going to launch right into some of the updates that have come about over the last couple of months here at UC San Diego. Obviously, it has been quite a tumultuous year for everybody, but UC San Diego, due to the very, very low rates of COVID-19 transmission, keeping rates low, and adhering to strict public health guidelines, is ready to reopen for the fall for primarily in-person attendance, again, in accordance with public health guidelines. So this return to campus for the fall is occurring in phases. Right now, faculty and researchers are returning to campus, and then staff will return this summer and early fall to make sure everything is done safely. There will be continued strict adherence to daily symptom screening and testing for those who are symptomatic. What I would encourage all of you to do is to remember the site, bookmark this site if you have not already taken a look at it. It is the Return to Learn website. So this is the university's official website that goes over every single update that has to do with UC San Diego returning to instruction this fall. It provides information on everything from vaccine requirements to classroom instruction, enrollment, testing, housing. It's quite comprehensive. So I really recommend you take a look at Return to Learn. Thank you, Grace, for putting that in the chat function for everyone to take a look at. I want to just point you to a specific section of the Return to Learn site, the frequently asked questions for fall 2021 instruction, vaccines, and enrollment. If you go to the Return to Learn website, at the very top left-hand corner, you'll hover over the About button and then questions and answers. This is where you'll find a lot of answers to common questions that we see from our students coming through. I will cover enrollment and remote coursework in just a few moments, because I know this is obviously an important topic for our students abroad. All right. Okay, so we know that, of course, even though the university is returning to in-person instruction, what does this mean in terms of practical terms for international students? We know there are various visa and travel hurdles for our students to overcome. So we want to address those and go over those in a little bit more detail today. ISPO is aware that US consulates are slowly reopening. We're also aware of ongoing delays in obtaining appointments and having visas issued due to high backlog issues. So we're also aware that local conditions in particular areas of the world are making it difficult for our students to obtain visa appointments, particularly in India and Russia, for example, until the late summer or early fall. Through this uncertainty, though, we encourage students to check their local US consulate websites for appointment availability updates. We don't receive those updates directly. They will come directly from the consular services or embassy websites. The recent announcement regarding the national interest exception, NIE, which I'll go over in a moment, has opened up visa and travel opportunities from some students from certain regions of the world. However, we do acknowledge there is still some confusion over this policy when it was released. So we're going to try to clarify as best we can here. So on April 26th, the US State Department announced that some student visa holders would be exempt from certain pandemic-related travel restrictions under what is called the National Interest Exception, or NIE, policy. So this is good news, especially for students from Brazil, China, India, Iran, Ireland, South Africa, the UK, and the Schengen region of Europe, who are subject to certain travel restrictions at the moment. What it means is that an automatic exception is given for F1 students with valid visas. That means you have a visa stamp that's valid already in your passport, whose programs begin on or after August 1st, 2021. Those who do not have a valid visa, that is, you're applying for one for the very first time, will need to still apply for a visa at a US embassy or consulate. So while we have observed inconsistencies in how the policy is being implemented at different embassies and consulates, it is clear that students with in-person or hybrid coursework, that is exactly what UCSD is offering this fall. So those students with that in-person coursework that begins prior to August 1st are not eligible for the national interest exception and must apply for an individual national interest exception, NIE, to seek entry. On May 3rd, our professional association, the NAFSA Association of International Educators, wrote a letter to the US Department of State advocating for more clarity in this policy and revisions to the NIE, but thus far the policy stands. So what this means again is that students with valid visas, maybe they've been part of a program already in the United States, they still have a valid visa, and whose programs begin at UCSD after August 1st, which for most students, that is the case. It is September 20th is when programs begin. You should be eligible for an automatic exception of the NIE if you're from one of these countries. But if you don't have a valid visa, you still need to go and apply for a visa and make sure that that start date on your I-20 or DS 2019 is after August 1st. So this would really impact those who are trying to come in for early start programs. with an early start date. Do note that even if you have a September 20th start date, or whatever your start date is listed on your I-20, for new students, you are able to arrive up to 30 days before that start date. So that will still allow you to enter the country prior to the beginning of the fall. We encourage all of you because, again, so many of these policies are changing, are updating constantly. We encourage you with any questions about the NIE to stay up to date with ISPO's inews.ucsd.edu, which I'll go over that information later in the presentation, and refer to our regular iStudents newsletters for information about the NIE. If you have questions about your individual case, we also encourage you to contact ISPO. And again, contact information will be provided at the end of this presentation for further information. Finally, in addition to the travel restrictions, the NIE, we acknowledge that flight availability for late summer and fall are quite limited at the moment due to demand. We know that prices are very, very high. So we understand that this does make things difficult for our students to come back to campus, to come to campus and begin their studies in person. Again, we encourage students to continue to monitor airline websites for availability as more flights are added. We know this will change throughout the summer months. Next slide. Okay, so for those who are able to get to campus, we want to kind of give you a picture of what you will expect when you arrive here, and also to kind of provide clarity on how UC San Diego is adhering to public health standards and making sure everything is safe for return to campus. So for 14 days after travel, students must monitor themselves closely for symptoms of COVID-19 and strictly follow UC San Diego and San Diego public health guidelines, which are outlined on the Return to Learn site. Students who reside on campus will be expected to participate in daily symptom screening. This is actually a very easy, it's almost like an app. Basically, you're sent a link every day to describe if you're feeling any symptoms of COVID, and you submit that. If you are, you'll be encouraged to test. If you are symptomatic. If you are not, then you are cleared for the day. It's very easy. Staff and students have been doing this for several months at UC San Diego, and it's been very, very effective in trying to monitor symptoms and encourage testing if it might be needed. I do want to clarify that asymptomatic testing, so of course, those who are not showing any symptoms, it is not required for fully vaccinated students. Fully vaccinated means 2 weeks after your final dose of the vaccine. Symptomatic testing will continue, and it will be made available on campus to all students and staff. Details about screening and testing will be communicated to students through email, specifically from housing and dining services. And for information on any sort of travel quarantine at all, please again visit the HDH website. You can see the link here, hdhhome.ucsd.edu, and Grace has helpfully put that in the link as well. As of now, there are no quarantine requirements when you arrive immediately. Again, as described at the beginning here, students are asked to monitor themselves closely for 14 days after travel. And of course, you must be aware to board any flights internationally. Most airlines have strict requirements to show that you have a negative COVID test about 2 or 3 days before you board. So those guidelines you will have to meet before you come to the US, but right now quarantine is not required on campus at UC San Diego. Next slide. Right, so now I want to go over enrollment and course availability, because I know this is a significant factor that our international students have to consider when planning their fall quarter. It's whether the availability of online coursework is there. Should they, for a variety of reasons, should they not be able to make it to San Diego in time for the start of fall quarter? So we're going to address that in the next slide here. Well, for fall of 2021, UC San Diego recognizes that some students may be unable to join us from abroad, again, due to the visa and travel restrictions that we just discussed. The campus is committed to the success of all students, and they are planning to offer remote instances of key gateway courses so that these students can make progress on their academic journey. Beginning July 1st, academic departments working with the registrar will be able to change classroom requests or instruction modality for specific courses as needed to support students impacted by travel or visa restrictions. So more information will be released by the university then at the beginning of July in order for students to make informed decisions about the fall quarter. In some cases, excuse me, students impacted by visa or travel restrictions may need to make adjustments to their academic plans in consultation with their academic advisor. So that is, they may need to change the sequence in which they take courses. The campus is asking departments and faculty to help ensure that students are not disproportionately impacted by situations like this outside of their control, and we'll be looking at data and information in early July to see which courses would be most important to offer online for those students who may not be able to come here this fall. If you decide in consultation with your academic advisor that certain courses are not available, that you're not able to access, and that perhaps delaying your program start might make more sense for your academic plans, it's important that you communicate this with them. Really stay in close contact with your academic advisor, or your college advisor if you're an undergraduate student. If delaying your program is something that you want to do, and if it is approved, then it's also very important to communicate with ISPO about these plans so we can adjust the start date on your I-20 or DS 2019 document. These program date changes can be made via request through ISPO's iPortal system. So this is the same system through which you requested your original I-20 or DS 2019 documents. All right, next slide. Okay, so finally here, I want to go over vaccine information again, because I know this is a hugely important topic for our students, for anyone returning to campus. And for those of you who do plan to come back and are able to begin your classes in person this fall, I want to go over this information, the requirements and availability of the vaccine to come this fall. Okay, so in terms of requirements for a vaccine, currently there's a proposed UC presidential policy to require all students, faculty, and staff to be vaccinated. This policy is currently finishing review. It went under a 30-day review process and comment period, and the results of that review should be announced shortly. So formalized policy should be announced fairly soon. And again, will be communicated to students from UC San Diego and will be available on the Return to Learn website. UC San Diego, just for clarity on what vaccines are accepted, will accept any World Health Organization approved vaccines. So there are many of those vaccines. The list does sometimes change, so we're not listing what those specific vaccines are. But if you go to the WHO website, take a look at their approved vaccines, those are the ones that UC San Diego will accept. There is more information on the Return to Learn site about how to prove that you've received your COVID-19 vaccine. The university will accept documentation that is, if it is not in English, to be translated into English, just noting that you have received both doses of the vaccine. If for whatever reason you are unable to obtain the vaccine in your home country, you can obtain the vaccine for free at UC San Diego upon arrival. We do just want to clarify, if you are able to obtain the vaccine in your home country, we strongly encourage you to obtain that vaccine before you travel. Don't wait to get that vaccine when you get here. Please do obtain that vaccine there. But if you're unable to for any reason, do know that it is available here at UC San Diego. And again, you can consult the returntolearn.ucsd.edu website for more information about the requirements and how to get a vaccine. All right, next slide. So I just want to go over finally some resources here before we go over some final reminders and deadlines so we can open it up for question and answer. Again, I've mentioned this several times in the presentation, and Grace has helpfully put this in the chat. So a few links to remember here. Again, the Return to Learn site, which is full of helpful information about how UC San Diego is returning to in-person instruction this fall. I also want to direct you to the ISPO coronavirus information page. So this page is specifically for international students. The questions on there come from our students, and they are answered specifically so they address your situation and how they all relate to the pandemic and travel, visa, employment, all of those different aspects. So again, Grace has popped that in the chat. Please visit as soon as you can. We also want to, again, highlight the iNews student page. This is where you're going to find information on how to request your visa documents or make adjustments to your visa documents at inewstudent.ucsd.edu. The UC San Diego registrar information, they actually just updated their enrollment frequently asked questions and go over some of the important points that students should remember. It also goes over how to identify what is an online class versus an in-person class. So those FAQs are really helpful for students navigating enrollment and what classes to choose for the fall. And finally, we encourage students to check out the latest travel updates, travel.state.gov. This gives up-to-date information about requirements for entering the United States, what requirements they may be, vaccine requirements, quarantine requirements, and so forth. Obviously, everything has been so changeable during these last 14, 15 months. We encourage you to keep up to date with these official websites for information on travel before you book flights and enter the United States. All right, next slide. So finally here, we just want to go over some important deadlines. They are not related necessarily to the pandemic, but they are checklist items that we want our students to be aware of because we know there are so many different things going on. As I mentioned, via the iNews student website, you can request your visa documents now. Many students have already done so. Our processing time is 15 business days, so make sure that you are requesting your documents. Don't delay. If you have uncertainty and you want to wait because you don't know if you're going to want to come in for the fall, we're asked that you go ahead and submit anyway. We can always adjust it later. It's better to have something in hand than not have anything at all, and then it be sort of a rush at the very last minute. So definitely request those as soon as you can. June 7th is the deadline for on-campus housing for undergraduate transfer students. So these are coming in for their third year at UC San Diego. The first year deadline for undergraduates was on May 7th. So just be cognizant of that. We also encourage you now to complete the iTriton online training. So this is specific pre-orientation training specifically for international students, and it goes over a variety of topics, again, related to how to maintain your status, employment, how to get involved on campus. It's a wonderful orientation via Canvas that you can access, and you can go to canvas.ucsd.edu to register. We also encourage our students to complete the student health screening and immunization forms. So in addition to submitting your proof of COVID vaccine via this system, you also have to provide proof of childhood vaccinations, and there's also a tuberculosis form, screening form that needs to be completed. Those deadlines pop up throughout the summer, so make sure you complete that as soon as possible. We know sometimes these official forms are hard to get because of administrative delays, so make sure you start the process now. You can go to shwadmin.ucsd.edu to upload that information and find out all the deadlines. And finally, we are still having new international student orientation. We are in the throes of planning right now. For those who are unable to make it to campus, don't worry, we will have a virtual option, but we are planning some hybrid in-person and virtual programming and informational sessions for orientation this year. So go to iorientation.ucsd.edu where more information will be updated soon. All right. So now we'd like to open up to questions and answers. Grace is going to be helping moderating some of these questions, and we'll.
Thank you so much, Gabby, for just the wealth of information and knowledge that you've covered on so many different topics. And we have a lot of good questions in the Q&A already, so we'll go ahead and jump right in. So our first question reads, will ISPO provide us a supporting letter if we are applying for an expedited visa appointment? And the student is referring to some other universities who are providing such letters.
Yes, excuse me. Yes, this is a good question. We can provide support letters if you are applying for an expedited visa appointment. These in the past have been quite rare requests. So the normal system that you would apply for these letters through the iPortal doesn't quite handle these requests yet. So we are updating our system to intake these requests and provide a letter to the students so they have something to request that expedited visa appointment.
All right. Our next question, I'll actually go ahead and take. So the question reads, when can we register for new international student orientation for the 2021-2022 academic year? And so like Gabby mentioned, we are in the throes of planning it right now, but you will be sure to, you'll know when the registration is open. We will be communicating that through our iNew student newsletters. So you should be currently getting those right now. If not, please reach out to inewstudent@ucsd.edu. So we'll definitely announce when registration is open. We'll also announce when registration is open on our website, iorientation.ucsd.edu. So we're in the middle of planning it, but then once registration is available, we'll make sure to communicate that through almost every method we have available to us. So stay tuned. Okay, so our next question reads, I have my visa appointment in August. In case things don't work out, can I apply for a deferral in August? This student specifically is in the CSE department.
Yes. So we anticipate getting some of these questions, these requests from students. I cannot comment specifically on CSE. However, as mentioned earlier, if we encourage you to be in close contact with your advisor in your department. They will work closely with admissions to defer your admission if you need to. I know in the past, they have been flexible with this owing to issues, concerns beyond a student's control, like visa delays. So what I recommend doing, attend your visa appointment, of course, and if they just let your department know if there are any delays. And then stay in close contact, ask them if you can defer. They will let you know by which deadline you will have to defer by. They have their own internal deadlines. Once you have deferred, if you are able to, contact ISPO via the iPortal to request an amendment. So there's an updated start date on your visa documents, reflecting when you actually will enter the country in the future.
Wonderful. Thanks, Gabby. So our next question reads, if no visa appointments are available and graduate students have to start remotely, can they still be paid?
Yes, this is an excellent question, something that was a huge topic this last year. So graduate students who are employed abroad outside the United States, there are many complicating factors with paying graduate students in return for quote unquote services rendered, that is employment, because of local labor laws, tax implications, and so forth. Right now, this is actually a UC-wide issue, not just UC San Diego specific. And as of now, they are still trying to figure out exact policy to let departments know whether they can pay their students for employment. I believe they've had to curtail that. So what will happen is departments will be reaching out to students, the university graduate division, I should say, will be reaching out to students to provide clarity on whether or not you can be employed from abroad. But I know they have had to curtail this due to those concerns in the past.
Great. So I think you might have covered this in the presentation, but can you please reiterate, if the student has not been vaccinated, will they still need to quarantine?
Yeah, so right now the university does not have a quarantine policy. That information would be listed on the Return to Learn site or the Housing, Dining, Hospitality site. They do not have a quarantine policy in place. They just encourage you to self-monitor symptoms 14 days after travel. And if you have any symptoms, to go get tested immediately. And of course, once you do arrive, since that vaccine is offered for free at UC San Diego, we recommend getting that vaccine as quickly as possible.
Wonderful. All right, so our next question is, if we are unable to get a visa appointment in time, can we attend classes online from our home country?
Yeah, so as mentioned in the presentation, the beginning of July is when we will have more clarity on this answer. Right now, the faculty are taking a look at all of the different classes that are being offered, different course sequences, and seeing which ones make the most sense to be offered remotely. So there will be classes offered remotely, specifically because the university knows these students are impacted by visa delays or travel restrictions. But there will not be more clarity on which classes those are until closer to the beginning of July.
All right, so our next question reads, starting from what date are international students able to enter the US?
Yeah, so this will depend on the date that's listed on your I-20 or your DS 2019. For the vast majority of students, that start date is September 20th, 2021. And because international students are able to enter 30 days before that date, you can enter as early as August 21st, 2021. So just remember 30 days before the start date on your documents.
All right, so we have a question regarding a student who has an active visa and is attending a university here in the US. So they're wondering maybe what are some next steps, if they should transfer their CVIS record or something else. And if they should transfer the CVIS record, when, what is the timeline recommended?
Yeah, this is really important because we do have quite a few students who are already in the United States studying at a higher institution, education institution, university, college, or in some cases, studied in F1 status at a high school and are starting their undergraduate studies. So if you already have an active visa and you are in the United States, we highly recommend, due to travel restrictions, that you transfer your CVIS number over to UC San Diego. If you go to inewstudent.ucsd.edu, depending on whether you are, what level you are on, it sounds like you are going to be a graduate student, click on graduate students. There are actually steps within that first section of instructions on how to transfer your record. So you must transfer your record within 60 days of your last date of enrollment at your previous institution. That's the rule you'll need to be aware of. As long as you transfer that to us within 60 days of your last date of enrollment, we can produce an I-20 for you. You will retain the same CVIS ID, and you can remain in the United States. So try to take care of that as soon as you can.
All right. So we have some questions regarding vaccines and those approved by the World Health Organization and otherwise. So this question reads, if I've taken a non-WHO approved vaccine, will there be any problems at UC San Diego?
So right now we don't have clarity on this answer from our colleagues, but we will take this back to our Vice Chancellor Student Affairs to see what potential issues there might be. It might just be that when you submit your information to Student Health, they might have additional questions and additional screening, but we don't know with certainty yet what this means. So we will take this back to our colleagues and have them communicate this and add this to their FAQs so students know exactly what to do.
Thank you so much, Gabby. All right, so we have a question regarding the national interest exception. So the question reads, could you please explain more about the NIE if a student has a B1 or a B2 visa? How does it apply, or does it help in any way?
Yeah, so the NIE, the exception that was announced is for very specific categories of visa holders. To my knowledge, it does not apply to B1, B2 visa holders. They're very specific visa holders, including F1 students, but not B1, B2. Additionally, it's really important to remember that you cannot begin studies in B1 or B2 tourist or business status. You must be in F1 status. So if you are able to travel, you're here on a tourist visa already, you would still need to depart the US apply for the F1, and return to be able to legally start your studies in status this fall.
Great. Thank you, Gabby. Our next question reads, what options do I have if I am unable to arrive on campus before the program start date? And could I face any problems at immigration if I travel to the US after my program start date?
Yeah. So if you're unable to arrive to campus before the program start date, but you still plan to arrive within that quarter, there could potentially be questions at the border if, let's say, you have a September 20th start date and you want to arrive on October 1st, because obviously that start date has passed. They might have questions about, you starting your classes on time and so forth. So in cases like that, we encourage you in our iPortal. We actually have a travel support letter that is offered to every new and continuing student that details that if, as long as you begin classes within the first 2 weeks of that quarter, even if your start date was on the 20th of September and you're entering after, that this is acceptable, that we will support your travel. So you can download that letter in the iPortal. It's in one of the first screens when you log in. We encourage everybody to download that letter to have it with you when you travel. If the start date, if your travel to the United States is going to be any later than 2 weeks after the quarter has started, it's really important you talk to ISPO to arrange for an adjustment of your start date, and it would have to be to the next quarter. You couldn't just pick a start date in the middle of the quarter, unfortunately. It would have to be to the next quarter. So you'll need to work then closely with your department, or your college and ISPO to arrange for a deferral if it's allowed for the next quarter, and then to adjust your visa documents to allow you to enter for the next term.
All right. So our next question is, and we might have to refer to our colleagues in graduate division for this question, but this question reads, I'm an incoming PhD student and I haven't been assigned a department academic advisor thus far. Whom should I contact?
Yes. So for graduate students, the number one person you really want to stay in contact with for this kind of information is your graduate coordinator. So although you won't have an academic advisor yet, your graduate coordinator, who should hopefully already be in touch with you, but if not, the graduate coordinator is usually listed on the department's staff website. Then get in touch with that individual and they can help you identify who that advisor might be or how to go about obtaining an advisor. That's your best bet there.
Wonderful. Thanks, Gabby. Okay. Our next question reads, can I roam on campus and take my classes in person after taking my first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine? And do I have to take the symptoms test every day?
Yeah, so this is a good question, and it's the information is changing quite rapidly, especially because California is loosening a lot of restrictions coming up in June, actually June 15th. So things are changing quite quickly. However, UC San Diego is still being very conservative and adhering to safety guidelines to make sure the community is safe. So if you have taken your first dose of the vaccine, you're not considered fully vaccinated yet. You're only considered fully vaccinated 2 weeks after your second vaccine. Therefore, the university asks that individuals still wear masks outdoors. If you are not fully vaccinated, and you, whether asymptomatic or symptomatic, the university recommends that you do take the symptom screening still daily. This information, I just do want to clarify, it could change over the next, several weeks, months. But for right now, this is the conservative sort of answer, and that we still want our students to monitor their symptoms, do the symptom screening daily. If you are fully vaccinated, you do not have to do the asymptomatic screening, but we are still taking precautions for non-vaccinated individuals.
Wonderful, thank you. So we're also seeing some questions regarding, for example, housing. So this question reads, if I receive a housing offer for fall 2021, living on campus, but then I realize that I need to start remotely, will my housing offer be canceled? And would I be under rent control for the 2021-2022 cycle? So let's say the student was planning on living on campus for fall 2021, but then has to start remotely. What steps should they follow in that case?
Yeah, I know housing was flexible with students this last year who encountered difficulties like this. We recommend that you follow the link to the HDH website that Grace put in the chat a little bit earlier. You can just go to hdh.ucsd.edu. On their website, they actually address these questions specifically about what happens if you can't make it to campus, if you have these issues. If they don't provide enough clarity, we recommend contacting HDH directly, hdh@ucsd.edu. Housing at ucsd.edu. They can provide specific information on your case and what might be possible for maybe deferring your offer of housing or what have you. So I recommend contacting them directly and consulting their website.
Wonderful. Thanks, Gabby. So some more questions about the vaccine. So let's say a student is unable to obtain even their first dose before they arrive at UC San Diego, so they have not been vaccinated. What is UC San Diego's recommendation for that student?
Yeah, if you haven't received your first dose yet, then your priority should be getting that vaccination when you arrive as soon as possible. We are still waiting on information from UC San Diego Health on how they're going to be rolling out the vaccine for students, but it is readily available even now on campus for any student or staff member for free. So more communication will be coming from the campus about distributing the vaccine for all students when they arrive to campus. And I see too, there's a follow-up question. If you've been given the first vaccine before you leave your home country, what do you do in that case? So when you arrive to UC San Diego, of course, make sure you have documentation of that first dose of the vaccine. You want to make sure, that you can get that second vaccine as soon as possible within a time frame. More information will be released by UC San Diego about how to obtain the second vaccine, but it's important you keep that documentation so they know what type of vaccine you received, so they know what type of second vaccine you'll need to get when you come to UC San Diego.
Wonderful. So we have a question about transferring your CVIS record. So for the student who has a valid F1 visa and has maintained full-time status while staying abroad, is the CVIS transfer from the community college enough to enter the US without applying for a new visa?
Yes. So the Student Exchange Visitor Program has allowed for increased flexibility for students. And as long as you have maintained full-time status at your previous institution, you have an active I-20, that I-20 should be able to be transferred, and it's then issued by UC San Diego, sent to you, and you're able to use that to enter the United States.
Great. All right. Okay, so as I'm looking through the questions and trying to see what are some common questions. Well, first, I see a question in the chat regarding if the iTriton orientation is the same as the iTriton online training. And yes, they are. So I know many of our students have already started to take the iTriton course on Canvas. That's the platform in which the course is held, and have found it very useful. A lot of their common questions have been answered via iTriton. So I encourage you to register your account on Canvas and then accept that invitation to complete iTriton. But to clarify and to confirm, yes, iTriton orientation is the same as the iTriton online training. And I see another question about, is it mandatory to attend new international student orientation in person? And so the answer is no, in the sense that we recognize that some of our students will not be able to physically arrive in person. So all mandatory components of new international student orientation will be held virtually. But like Gabi mentioned previously, we are hoping to do some in-person social events, social programming. So we'll have social programming available both in person as well as virtual. But again, all mandatory pieces will be online, will be held virtually. And I'm seeing a few questions about orientation that I'll go ahead and take. So are the orientations required? So yes, the orientations are required. So if you're an undergraduate student, then you'll need to complete your college orientation as well as international orientation. And if you're a graduate student, you'll need to complete graduate orientation as well as international orientation. So yes, make sure to sign up and register because these orientations are required. And then Gabi, I'm curious as you are scrolling through the question and answer function, if any questions are popping out to you as common questions to address.
Yeah, there was one question that came up regarding expired documentation and obtaining an I-20. Again, we know this is yet another hurdle that our students are dealing with. If you have an expired passport, and we know that these services are sharply curtailed or shut down in several countries right now. The question is, can I still obtain an I-20 even though I have an expired passport, because there's no way I can renew my passport right now? The answer is yes, we will still provide you an I-20. What we recommend you do in your iPortal application is put a note in there to say that you are attempting to renew your passport at the moment, but it is impossible due to closures, and the advisor will still process your I-20. Of course, you will need your passport to be valid by the time you go to your visa appointment. I don't know if consulates are offering more flexibility there. Certainly it will need to be valid by the time you travel. But we will still facilitate issuance for your I-20 with an expired passport. And there was another question here. This has to do with online courses and switching over from online to in-person down the line. So if classes are decided to be conducted online, would it be possible that we enroll for the first quarter online and then arrive to campus for the second quarter onwards? Yes, this is possible. If you were to begin all your classes online and begin your studies remotely, we would ask that you, again, request an adjustment to your I-20 to reflect the start date of the actual quarter that you plan to be here in person. So if that happens and you are taking all classes remotely, then you submit a request to the iPortal saying you don't plan to attend classes in person until winter quarter, and we will adjust the start date with a January start date. So then you can arrive in January to begin your classes in person then.
All right. So I'm seeing a few questions from graduate students about bringing their transcripts and if they're bringing the physical copy of their transcripts, if it needs to be sealed. And I'll go ahead and put this email address in the chat. But for these types of questions, we encourage you to reach out to the graduate division. And so I'm going to go ahead and type it right now, but you can email gradadmissions@ucsd.edu, and they will be able to assist you with this specific question.
There are a couple questions having to do with tuberculosis screening. We know that this is really difficult for students from certain areas in the world to obtain right now because of closures. And they're asking if TB screening has to be done from their home country, or can we do this on campus? This is something we would recommend contacting student health about, because while student health usually can provide vaccines, for example, for students who don't have full vaccinations when they come over, I don't know if they can provide TB screening in particular. So we recommend contacting student health at ucsd.edu. They will be able to provide clarity on whether this is a service that can be offered when you arrived at campus.
Gabi, we have one question regarding if Canadian students are required to apply for a student visa or if the form I-20 from UC San Diego will be enough.
Yeah, good question. So our Canadian students do not have to apply for a visa. The I-20, or if you're a J student, DS 2019, those two documents are sufficient for entry into the country. You do still need to make sure you pay the CVIS fee. So most students, when they're applying for their visa, they pay the CVIS fee then. But you need to make sure, just go online and pay the CVIS fee and take that receipt with you alongside your I-20 or DS 2019, and that's what you will use for entry into the United States.
Wonderful. Our next question reads, I'm going to do my visa application interview soon. Should I fill in the information, and I should fill in the information about the place where I'll live in San Diego. If I applied for housing on campus and I'm still on the wait list, what address should I provide to the embassy?
Yeah, so you can actually just use UC San Diego's general address. That is the 9500 Gilman Drive address. Maybe Grace can pop that in the chat. So yeah, it doesn't have to be that specific. If you know or you're planning to live on campus, you can just put UC San Diego's general address, and that should be fine. And thank you, Grace, for that. I'm noticing too, we have a question. If we cannot schedule a visa appointment in time for the fall, how do we need to request a new I-20? Is it up to the department to determine the new start date for the grad students? Yeah, so the first step you need to take and this goes for graduate students as well as undergraduate students. The very first step you need to take if you know that you won't be able to arrive in time is to talk to, and I should say, and you don't plan on taking any classes online in the fall. That is, you don't plan on starting your studies until a later point. Contact your department first. And for undergraduates, contact your college first. They will help you determine next steps. They will let you know what future term they will let you defer to. Usually graduate students have more flexibility. You can usually defer 1 quarter at a time, or sometimes if you want to defer an entire year, you can. Undergraduates, it's less flexible. Usually you can only defer up to the next year. You can't do it 1 quarter at a time. So start there first. And then once you have approval, you will request your updated documents via the iPortal from ISPO to reflect your new start date. And there's a question here about orientation, actually. So when will orientation typically take place? And if it does, so that we can book flights accordingly. So it depends. We have, there's several orientations that occur. We can speak specifically for ISPO, but there are college orientations, there are graduate department orientations, graduate division orientations. So those typically take place throughout the entire month of September. I know that ISPO is looking at beginning their orientations earlier in September, likely the beginning of that month, or I should say this, maybe the second or third week of that month. However, I want to be really clear with students that virtual options are available, especially for our core sessions, the ones that we require students to really take part in. So if you cannot make it in time, you can always access them virtually. I think the same can be said for the colleges. Again, those dates vary. So we encourage you to check with the college if you're an undergraduate, or if you're a graduate student, check with your department or graduate division on those dates and their availability for online virtual orientation, so you know when to arrive.
Great. Gabi, we have an additional question that reads, if I do fall 2021 online, will I still be eligible for OPT?
So OPT requirements state that you must be in status, that is, you have a CVIS active record for a full academic year before you can take part in OPT. If you're not physically in the United States, that means we cannot activate your CVIS record yet until you arrive. So that means that you'll have to wait an additional quarter to obtain approval for OPT. So if you start in the winter, you have to be enrolled for all of winter, all of spring. And if you enroll full-time for the summer, the following summer, it's not required, then that could count as another quarter and you could begin OPT for the fall. But you would have to basically move everything up a quarter if you're not going to be here in person for the fall.
I see a question that's asking about how to sign up for the vaccine at UC San Diego if you're currently abroad. And to clarify, so at this time, there isn't a way for you to currently sign up for the vaccine at UC San Diego, but upon arrival, you will be provided that information about different ways. So like Abby mentioned previously, once you arrive at UC San Diego, if you haven't gotten the COVID-19 vaccine, that will be one of the first things you'll want to do, and you'll be provided information once you're on campus about the best way. It's constantly changing as we are adhering to health and county guidelines and trying to make it as efficient as possible. So you'll get that information once you come to campus.
And I do just want to follow on from Grace's answer here. We're getting a lot of questions about sort of the timing between doses. And I know some students are in a sort of difficult situation with when they've gotten their first shot or planning to, and when they can get their second one, what types of vaccinations they've gotten and so forth. These are more detailed questions that our Return to Learn team in Student Affairs, I think, really need to address. So I'm going to take these questions back to our team in Student Affairs, see if they can clarify on their website and communicate this to students, because we know, you are not the only student. There are many students who have these questions, so they can distribute that information to you. There's one question about if you're not unable to come to campus due to visa restrictions, there are no chances of my admission being canceled. Is that right? Your admission wouldn't be canceled, certainly, but again, this is where we encourage you to be in very close contact with your department, explain the situation. Departments have been very flexible in allowing for deferrals, adjusting their start date. But your admission would not be canceled outright. But again, it's important you keep up that communication so they know what's happening.
And Gabby, I actually have a follow-up question regarding that. So this student is asking, what is the deadline for deferrals?
So the deadline for deferrals is actually department dependent. Deferrals used to be such a rarity before the pandemic that there really were not university-wide deadlines set for this, and it was department dependent, and that is still the case. So again, stay in touch with your department, ask them when do I need to decide by, when to defer, so they can provide that deadline to you. Okay, I'm just looking through some final, only have a couple minutes here, so we're looking through some final questions here.
Gabby, I see one question that reads, can a student start working at a lab before their program start date?
So that's kind of a complicated question. It's for students who are arriving. So students who are arriving within their 30 days of the start date of their I-20, yes, they may begin, but you cannot enter the United States for the sole purpose of wanting to begin work if you're a new student. So for example, if you have been offered a research position for employment that starts in July, but your classes don't start until September, Obviously, you need to enter the country earlier. You would need an earlier start date on your I-20, and we would not be able to adjust that just to begin employment. There would have to be an academic reason. But if you were entering within the 30 days prior to your start date, then this is fine.
All right. So that is unfortunately all of the time that we have today for this pre-arrival webinar. We tried to get through as many questions as we could, so hopefully that this webinar provided you some helpful information. We do understand that so many things are up in the air, and so we'll be doing our best to communicate information as soon as we have it to you. So whether it's by webinars such as these, a lot of our iNews students newsletters contain some updated information. And like Gabi mentioned, two great resources and websites are inews.ucsd.edu and iupdates.ucsd.edu. So those are relevant information specifically for international students at UC San Diego. And then Return to Learn has a lot of great information specifically about how UC San Diego is responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. So if we didn't answer your question during today's webinar, we encourage you to reach out to us at inewstudent@ucsd.edu. And we hope that you engage with us on Instagram. So we both definitely want to help you in a lot of the logistical support, but we also are so excited that you are a part of our Triton community. We want to welcome you, whether that's through social programs or different online avenues. As you can see here, we actually created a Instagram filter with celebrating that you are a part of our Triton community. So if you'd like to play around with that, we'd love to see it, and we'd love to reshare it if you tag us. So follow us. We also put a lot of our updates out on Instagram as well. So you can communicate with us in a myriad of ways, whether it be through our website, through email, through Zoom advising, or through social media. But with that, I want to thank you again for joining us. That's the conclusion of our time together today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.